When the Colorado and Southern Railway finally received permission to abandon the South Park line in 1937, the CNS, finding no buyers in 1938 for their surplus locomotives, began the process of scrapping them. This began in 1938 with number 5, and 1 month later consumed 65 and 58. There was an attempt at saving at least one engine for posterity. The railroad made an offer to any town along its line, a free narrow-gauge locomotive to stuff and mount. This would have been Engine 6. Despite the number of people who protested the abandonment of the line, not a single town along its remaining rails took them up on the offer. A memo to the superintendent of motive power stated that, quote, "The scrapping of 6 narrow-gauge engines, one of which we asked you to hold up, anticipating that we could use the engine for historical purposes, we now find that none of the towns is agreeable to accepting this engine. You may therefore scrap Engine 6, end quote. However, by 1941, one town, and eventually Idaho Springs, Central City, who had lost its railroad connection 10 years earlier, changed its mind and said yes, though it had to fight the management of the Burlington route, now owner of the CNS, for many months to get it at this point. By this time, the Q, as the Burlington route was sometimes called, didn't want to give away any assets, even if it was scrap value. Engine 71, that had the unfortunate privilege of being used on many scrapping operations on the South Park line, was chosen, along with gondola 4319 and combination car 20. It was taken to the end of track at Black Hawk in April of 1941. It was then hauled by truck and found a home on exhibit near the site of the Central City Depot. There it would remain for a little over 45 years. She did receive some attention over the years. During the 1950s or 1960s, the Burlington route sent someone along to spiff up the paint and, in the process, added the Burlington Herald to the whole train. A fence was also added to keep vandals out. Puffs of steam would return to the air in Central City, however, in 1968, as the Colorado Central Narrow-Gauge Tourist Railroad laid track to Packard Gulch. They ran trains with 2 Central American locomotives and some shays. The Colorado Central Narrow-Gauge Tourist Railroad never used number 71, but kept her proudly on display near their boarding site. This group, along with the locos and rolling stock, eventually moved to take over operation of trains on the Georgetown Loop project in 1973. Eventually, in 1981, the track was torn up. The Colorado Historical Society had the idea of also taking 71 to Silver Plume to restore it and run it on the loop. The engine was indeed taken to Silver Plume in 1986, which led to much consternation in Central City. A town newspaper referred to the situation as the Great Train Robbery. When the Colorado Historical Society then tried to move the tender, this is when some city residents came out to stop it. Their town had requested the locomotive and they wanted to keep it. Following this short incident, the engine was promptly returned home. Sort of. For some reason, the engine was not returned to its display site in Central City. It was instead placed on display along with the rest of its train on a new stretch of rail in Black Hawk. During the winter of 1987, a trucker by the name of Steve Clifford, who related his story in the Bogies in the Loop, happened to pass through Black Hawk when he noticed, quote, "a flimsy makeshift shed constructed over locomotive number 71 and its tender," end quote. This chance encounter led him to find out just what was going on, and also to him receiving a bid to transport the train on his truck back to Central City. Something was indeed going on. Steam rose again from the bear trap stack of 71 from roughly 1987 to 1989. Another organization stepped in to run the Central City line, this time named the Black Hawk and Central City Narrow Gauge Railroad, and number 71 was their star. There was a lot of discussion on the efficacy of the running of the locomotive in these years. That being said, she did live again, even if for a brief moment of relived history. The group certainly had big goals. A tourist guide from 1988 states the railroad is planning to, quote, reach Black Hawk in the next 5 years, end quote. This, unfortunately, was not to happen. The railroad folded, and 71 sat again, still with her gondola and combine, until she was moved once again. At some point, the land where the train had previously been displayed was sold, and so the train, minus the gondola this time, was transferred to the Coeur d'Alene mine on the opposite side of the valley in the early 1990s. By 1996, a chain link fence had been erected around the engine. Casinos came to the city of Central in 1991, and eventually, number 71, along with the Combine, were put on display on a track near a casino and hotel. And there she rests still today, Colorado and Southern 71, still in the town that originally took her.